The views and comments expressed on the Space Show by its guests, callers, and listeners belong to them. The Space Show and its hosts serve only as a platform and are not responsible for others' comments or views. All topics discussed on the Space Show are primarily for educational purposes.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they're easy, but because they are hard.
Start. 3, 2, 1.
It's the Space Show with Dr. David Livingston. Broadcasting to 7 continents, consistently bringing you quality news and interviews with the best and brightest minds in the new space economy. Here is the founder and host of the Space Show, the man who best articulates the vision of space commercial enterprise, Dr. David Livingston.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday afternoon West Coast Time Space Show program. I'm your host for the day, David Livingston. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. A couple of quick announcements. We're looking at a full-length Space Show program today. Hopefully you will give us a call and use email and just pay attention to the time so you do it while we're still on the air. That always helps. Toll-free number is 866-687-7223. Email drspace, DRSPACE, @thespaceshow.com. A couple of other quick announcements about upcomings. So Tuesday, we're sort of going off topic a little bit with the Space Show to have a little lighthearted show and fun for me. And that's because we have an adventurer coming on the show to talk about some of the wild adventures that he has pulled off. And you can read about him and his adventures on our newsletters. They're already posted and up and running. But he's been in multiple supersonic flights with even some of our highly secret bombers. He's done a lot of really cool things. He's come close to being on space flights, but then he backed out, and he will tell you why he backed out. Many of you will agree with him. It should be a fun program, lighthearted, sort of near space, but not as heavy space as what we normally do. And on Hotel Mars coming up, we have Dr. Bach from Caltech and JPL. He's the PI for the Sphere electronic telescope mission that just launched. It's on a 2-year mission. It's called Sphere X, and we're going to talk about that. Dr. Young Bai is back with us. He's got a book on photonic laser propulsion. He hasn't been with us for a while. He's down in Southern California. He's an incredible physicist. It will be good to hear from Young, and then no show for Mother's Day on Sunday. I won't go any further because I don't want to spend any more time. I want to get to our guest. In terms of the newsletters, our email one goes out early tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. West Coast time. If you want to receive it, please make sure I have your email address. And then most of important, I need to remind everybody we're a nonprofit, 501c3, listener and user-supported radio. So if you like what we're doing, please help us out and please contribute. There is a PayPal button in the upper right corner of our homepage, which is thespaceshow.com. PayPal is probably the most convenient way to donate, but we do work with Zelle if you have a U.S. bank. The email address for Zelle is david@onegiantleapfoundation.org. That is our nonprofit parent. And then we are also old school, probably because I'm an old guy, and so we still take checks and we still deal with the U.S. Post Office. So our Las Vegas address is on that PayPal button. If you do send us a check, make it payable to onegiantleapfoundation.org. Don't forget we have sponsors and a few advertisers for our nonprofit. The sponsors include the Atlantis Project. They also include AIAA, Helix Space in Luxembourg, the National Space Society, Celestis, Astrox Corp., Dr. Ben Arroyo with his great lunar development books, John Jossi with his great blog on space settlement Progress, and our latest sponsor, Artless Entertainment with the award-winning Drexton Family independent production company, Echo Park, LA. They write, direct, and produce feature films and TV projects. They do travel. They have encountered setbacks due to the Los Angeles fires, but they are still going strong. And if you are looking for these services, or you know people that are, check out their website, Artless, ARTLESS, entertainment.com. If you would like to be a sponsor, email me, please, at drspace@thespaceshow.com. So I'm going to introduce our guest in just a minute, but I got a really early morning text while I was walking Pepper that says, Happy Star Wars Day. Did anybody out there know that today is Star Wars Day? Well, I've never heard of it, Star Wars having a day, but I guess maybe they do. I say that because it's kind of relevant, because what our guest has to say is we might be seeing something like Star Wars taking place in space in the not-too-different future. I'll let Marc Feldman tell us if I'm exaggerating or if Star Wars in a piracy type of definition might be upon us. He's the managing partner of Ionia Capital Management. This is an aerospace and defense-based venture capital fund. He has more than 35 years of experience in commercializing tech and scaling startups. He has led teams across various industries, including life sciences, entertainment, media, telecommunications, consumer products, and aerospace and space. And he's worked at and advised Shamrock Capital, Disney. They've done really well. I hope you weren't advising them during their downfall. Interpublic Group, Vista Satellite, and more and more and more. Also Europe, Russia, the Middle East, Latin America. And he and his co-author, who unfortunately Hugh Taylor could not be with us, has a really great book out that all of you should be familiar with, Space Piracy, Preparing for a Criminal Crisis in Orbit. When I think of pirates, I think of Ethiopia and the U.S. Marine Corps a million years ago, and, you know, great literature and crocodiles and one-handed captains and all sorts of cool things. Good morning or good afternoon. Tell us about your book. Introduce it to us, and why did you decide to write about this with Hugh?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Livingston, for having me on your show, and I'm very much appreciated for the opportunity.
Just use David, okay? I'm pretty...
Okay, David, but I really am very grateful of the opportunity to discuss the book, and specifically as well as what we think will be a much more robust and, I won't say dystopian, but more... bad actors in space that official space players are not looking at or taking seriously, although that is beginning to change as the days and months and weeks go by. I've been involved in space since the 80s when I was hired by a former U.S. ambassador to Mexico named John Gavin, and he was appointed as president of a company called Univisa Satellite Services, which was a subsidiary of Televisa, which was the largest Spanish-language media company in the world, domiciled in Mexico. And Televisa, in partnership with the government of Mexico, wanted to have satellites, and we were tasked to put those satellites up. So I had a front row seat as a very, very junior player in this project of looking at the conceptualization of the satellites needed, negotiations with the manufacturer. At that time it was used aircraft, launching, and then basically marketing the transponders and the subcarriers to users. In this case, Televisa had substantial transponders. They were involved in broadcasting their telenovelas from Mexico to Spain, and the government of Mexico grabbed what it was appropriately theirs. So I have been in and out of space since the 80s, and more recently had a venture capital firm called Metatron Capital Partners, which got me very close up to the more commercialization of space and the technologies involved, and the players, government and commercial players. And despite which I concur with that space will be a very, very efficacious and profitable set of businesses. I noted that nobody was taking the ability of criminal organizations that would be disruptive to the investment banking and the propaganda from the commercialization of the trades on that, as well as from the government and the Space Force. If you look at the Space Force, in every report, whether it be from the Space Force or from the Defense Intelligence Agency, they look at the threats to their assets in basically sovereign nations, which is essentially China, Russia, and to a lesser extent, they would classify emerging threats of sovereign nations, North Korea and Iran. And in looking at this, you and I saw that they were not looking at what we would call non-state actors or rogue military organizations or criminal organizations that would be extremely attracted to space in a variety of reasons for profit and for disrupting it, basically as acting as entities working in quietly with state actors. And then we would have another silo of corporations that would be quite vast and powerful in the next several years, that would be analogous to the British East India Companies or the Dutch East India Companies, that would have no allegiance to any sovereign nation on Earth or in space, because right now space, the legal framework for corporations is extraordinarily weak. So going back to how will pirates be there and who are they, using as a notational example, let's take criminal cartels, which have enormous amounts of money, and actually nobody really knows how much they have, but they have diversified over the past several decades beyond criminal enterprises like cocaine and drug smuggling to become involved specifically in businesses, including but not limited to Panamex, which the Sinaloa cartels have an enormous influence on the operation of Panamex, which is the major oil energy company in Mexico. But it goes beyond that, because people would be astonished to learn that the Sinaloa cartel runs the oil business in Guinea-Bissau. It started off as a transportation point between Latin America and Africa to narcotics distribution in Europe, but they know how to run it. So they have developed over the years, and it's not just the Sinaloa or other Mexican cartels, how to deal with complex businesses from logistics, manufacturing, marketing, and so on. They have a tremendous amount of money coming in, and they have to launder this money. So it was sort of, we identified that space would be an ideal set of platforms, multiple platforms for criminals to begin laundering money. And they have enormous experiences doing that, from laundering from banks, real estate, all sorts of businesses in Mexico, agriculture in the United States and around the world. This is not a new thing for them, but space would be attractive because it's expensive, even though prices have come down. It's complicated. Nobody would be paying attention because they would not think that criminal cartels would be involved in laundering in space. Once it is our thesis, and we call this speculative nonfiction, our whole enterprise of space, and I'll get into more details in a moment, as well as what the large corporations will be doing up there. They will then understand how beginning in operations, they pay very close attention how these things work. And they will see that this is a very profitable set of opportunities, and they will become directly involved first as investors. And it could be direct investors. They could set up their own venture capital arms. They could set up private equity arms. They could become limited partners in entities that are already deeply involved in the space commercialization business, and they would become, and when they become limited partners, they can mask who they are, as well as from private equity firms or venture capital firms or other financial intermediaries as investors. They can start up their own companies. How will they get the talent? Well, the way they get the talent in various other ways. They would basically attract them. Case in point is they have their own recruitment arms. Again, I'm talking about Sonola, recruiting chemists from elite universities to work with them so they can create the precursor chemicals for fentanyl, as they take a peek and see that China's, as a supplier, may not be around supplying them with their needs for fentanyl and other precursor chemicals for that and other drugs as well. So they learn quickly and they adapt quickly. So if once they become operational, they can get the talent in several different ways. One, Roscosmos in Russia has basically limited their employment in commercial space, and there's a lot of unemployed space engineers and software developers from Russia that are looking for work. As we downsize here in the United States, they're going to have a lot of opportunities there too to recruit, and also they will be able to find opportunities by bribing or extorting people that work for Lockheed in the Space Force. This is sort of a method of that they use. You either you either can work with us on a money, or we'll extort it when we can find out what your weak points are and take advantage of that, just like any other intelligence agency would, because they understand that type of tradecraft. So what would they do? Well, we wrote a paper on our website that they could, let's say, when there's a commercial space station coming up, and that could happen within the next 3 to 4 years with a company called Axiom and others. A company called Sierra Nevada is aggressively working on commercial space stations. They could take it over. They could take it over by robotic, by software, and they could develop a technology that would allow them to physically take it over in concurrence with these technological helpers. Now, what do I mean by the technological capabilities of doing that? Well, if you look back at colonial America, criminals have always been on the forefront of developing technologies or design for their utilization. And the classic example is in shipping. We had a robust privateering set of actions during the colonial time. Privateering is state-sponsored piracy. You can get a letter of marque from Congress, which gives you permission to go after enemies of the United States for plunder and profit, which you split with the government, but it's yours. Privateers would go to where the shipping companies were based at that time, and still are to a lesser degree, up in New England all the way down the coast to South Carolina. And they would tell them, this is exactly the type of ship we want. We don't want merchant ships for cargo back and forth. We want ships that are going to go fast, that are going to be efficient, that are not going to have a lot of people. We're going to take prisoners for ransom, and we're going to take cargo for plunder, and we want you to press that envelope. And they did. And it worked. And so we see that happening as they get involved in other businesses like venture capital, and they basically penetrate various other areas, which they've done already. It's a book out of what the Chinese have done in Silicon Valley for getting a peek at some of the latest technologies. Cartels and criminal organizations will do the same, similar to what the Chinese, which some people could say they are criminal organizations. And they would basically use that. They would have the talents, as I mentioned, to help them put these things together, and they would participate in an organization of capability in space. Now, where would they domicile this? Well, Mexico was really essentially a narco state. It's not a normal state. People will tell you, because it's repeated over and over again, well, the cartels control 35% of Mexico. It's far more, I would say it's closer to 100%. There hasn't been a president of Mexico since the 80s, when I was looking at it, that has not been involved in the cartels. And what I mean by involved in the cartels, I'm not talking about just transactional relationships. I'm talking about the intertwining of the security services that are basically subservient to the cartels because of the amounts of money that they have been basically being bribed with for the past, let's say, 50, 60 years now, but particularly it started in the 80s. Now, this is not just true, by the way, with Mexico. They can domicile themselves in Mexico with the connivance of the highest levels of the Mexican government, and basically they could create and begin a parallel state of space industries there, if they desire. We think they probably will, and they could easily lay the foundations of that quietly in Mexico in hidden places. Okay? And that could go in other parts of Latin America as well. They can get, again, I emphasize they can get the talent, they have the money, and they will have the desire to do so.
But they have to get to space to wreak their havoc, right? How do they get to space?
Well, there's a very interesting thing. I can tell you with technology. I'll tell you a story that I personally experienced myself, because that is probably one of the key questions there. How do you get up there? I was recently, now it goes back several months ago, at a Google space investment set of presentations at Google's facility in Southern California in Santa Monica. And there was sort of, a quick, there was about 10 companies that were presenting, and one of them caught my attention. It was an Australian company called VBX, and what they do is they create bespoke plans for hardware for space. So I was extremely intrigued by that. So when they had the presentations afterwards, you could go to and have a much more robust conversation with the principals of these companies. And I went over to them and I asked them, I said, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. If I came up to you and I said, I have an idea for a new type of rocket, they would use AI and scour all the literature out there. They would then basically use their skills as space engineers to create plans that would enable you to create that bespoke rocket or whatever type of hardware you want. They will not manufacture it for you, but they could lead you in the right direction to manufacture whatever the designs that they come up with. So I then came up to them and I said, if I wanted to create a rocket that would go concurrently, let's say, as a Corsair, like the Corsairs would have, the pirates would have, dating back all the way to not just to the times of Jeffersonian Marine Corps, but even prior to that, the type of ships of Drake or Harry Morgan, they could do that. So they looked at me and they said, who the hell are you and why are you asking us this? And I told them I just have a book that's going to be published in a couple of months, and I told them what it was about, and they turned white, literally. And I said, oh, no. And I said, yeah, you may have some people come and talk to you about certain things, and you never know who they were and what they want, so here's a little bit of a heads up. So go a couple of months later, after that, one of our advisors on my fund and we have a nonprofit organization to study space criminality and piracy and governance, which is all baked into this, by the way. One of the advisors was curious about who that company was. And when I sent him material on it. He got back to me the next day and he said, well, what do you know? The head of the Defense Innovation Unit spent a great deal of time chatting with those guys. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And there's a lot of stuff that they can quietly make. But if you can create Corsairs, you can get up there, not just basically to disrupt, let's say, lumbering cargo ships like Musk wants to do from here to Mars or here to the moon or asteroids, but space stations. And we wrote a paper that's on our website about the day after hostages are taken from a space station. And there is no way that anything can be done with that. It's not like, there's a hostage situation in a building anywhere in the world, and you have your spec ops and your SWAT teams going there. They can get there quickly, but you can't get there in space quickly.
Yeah, but the amount of human spaceflight infrastructure that the bad actors would have to develop to take a hostage and support that hostage along with themselves and all the other stuff that goes into space, not only would it be unbelievably costly, they'd have to do a lot of R&D to develop the technology.
Well, yes, but if the pay, yes, they do. That would it would be costly. I don't think it would. Obviously, I have not done the numbers and penciled that out, but it could be done. You see, people thinking it's going to be basically climbing up on a ship. That would be part of it, but you can also basically use the software and basically hacking it and take the life support systems of a space station, a commercial space station, and you do this concurrently with humans basically on a ship that basically does board it. And basically say if it's not done within, let's say, 36 hours, then basically we're going to blow it up, or we're going to basically turn off all the life support systems and you pay us X. And there's nothing at this particular point in time that can be done to prevent that from happening. Either they pay up the ransom, or with criminals like as ruthless as cartels and similar organizations, they would kill them.
So they could take that kind of control from Earth, I would imagine. They wouldn't even need
Yes, they can. And there's also other things that they can do as well. It's not just we look at space from up from the Earth. We look at all the assets, communication systems down here on Earth. As I've mentioned spaceports. There's a whole host of infrastructure on Earth that could be disrupted. And will be, we think.
So your book's been out for a while. I know Leonard David did a review last month on your book.
It was very nice of him to do that.
Yeah, so what happens when people in the commercial space industry, NASA folks, maybe government folks, maybe Space Force, anybody who's hearing this, maybe even someone from another country, do they just dismiss these kinds of warnings as saying too far into the future, too costly,
too difficult? They did. That's a very good question. They still don't take it seriously because the infrastructure of the Space Force is geared towards state actors like China and, to a lesser extent, Russia. The Russian space, actually, if you go back deep, historically, that got Musk into business because he bought Russian engines in the first place. And Roscosmos was an extraordinarily, not anymore, but it could come back effective and creative space organization. The problem with Roscosmos is that it's so tied into the military. They just grab people right and left, and they don't allow people to create commercialized space opportunities. It's all for the military and has been since the Ukraine situation. China is also a little more sophisticated, is that they sort of blend it in, not as harshly as Russia, but there is not the dividing lines between commercial and military space utilization is blurred. We're going in that direction right now, but there is still a situation of a difference, an identifiable difference between commercial and military space. They don't take it seriously. There are a few. Colonel Felt, for instance, wrote an extremely nice forward to our book. Barbara Barrett, who wrote us a blurb, understands it, and others. But it's very difficult for them to take it seriously because they cannot imagine non-state actors doing it. being in space for reasons of cost, technological sophistication they think they don't have. We're arguing they do. If they don't have it, they can get it. They will want it. They're pirates. They don't care. They will find a way to do that. They've been doing it since the time of the Spanish and even before. The book goes back to Caesar, even before the Phoenicians,
I have a listener email question for you. Todd is in San Diego, and he says, if we fast forward, say, into the 2030s, and Musk is running starships with 100 or so people on them to Mars, and they're going to be on that mission for maybe 5 to 6 months or so, what you're suggesting is that somebody with enough brains and money and a bad enough actor, maybe Sinanola, maybe some other group, could hijack the starship on the way to Mars and say, I'm going to send it into an endless orbit into deep space where it'll be a tomb for everybody. You have 36 hours to do this, this, and this. Musk can't deal with it on his own, so he goes to the U.S. government for help, and they probably can't deal with it either. So
that's correct.
Is that a possibility?
Yes. Not only is it a possibility, let me give you another overlay on what the book deals with. We talk about criminality and pirates. Okay, criminals and pirates are not identical, although they're kissing cousins, because it's like terrorists. Terrorists are not the same as criminals, although they commit criminal acts, but it's not the same. In other words, using a maritime example, let's say, for instance, between a coast of the United States and 250 miles, if something happens on a ship, that's a crime. If it's out in the open seas beyond that, first of all, there's no law, but there's really piracy. So let me give you an example. I'm going to answer that gentleman's question with another underlying thing that we've discussed in the book about private corporations like the British East India companies up there. Back in the 1930s, there were, at least in Southern California, there were gambling ships. What they were is they went out between 3 and 5 miles off the coast of Los Angeles and San Pedro or Long Beach or whatever, Santa Monica, off the coast of Southern California, 3 to 5 miles. That was no man's land. That was international waters. So the sheriffs, the FBI, whatever, could not go on those gambling ships where there was an enormous amount of criminal activity being conducted based on that time. Space is analogous to that. Okay. So we understand there's going to be, our understanding is 3 silos in space. Silo number 1 will be sovereign nations. Right now, the sovereign nations that are active in space is Japan, the United States, China, and Russia. Coming up, secondary will be India, which has already been up there and doing extremely well. You will have Israel. Germany is coming up strong because most people don't realize that Germany's space program, 1, is not really tied into the ESA, the European Space Organizations, and for sure not the European Union. They, for some reason, have decided not to become part of that with their space activities. And then there will be others. The Arabs want in, particularly UAE and so on. They'll be renting out others. They'll develop their own, but there'll be much more sovereign nations up there. So that's category 1. On the other extreme, we see the criminal organizations. I could definitely see Mexico as a domicile for an entire parallel criminal set of space technology development operations going into space, having the ground stations, having all the accoutrements that we have here in the United States with the commercialization. They have the launchers, they'll have the communication satellites, they'll develop them. They will have the in-space manufacturing after they plunder it. They'll have the whole panoply of it because they're going to be, we think, very savvy. In between that, you're going to have the large corporations that I say are analogous to what the British East India Company and the Dutch East Company were when they were basically involved in plundering Asia. They're going to be plundering up there. They're going to have their mining operations or operations that we can't yet imagine. They're going to be interfacing because of their survival will be dependent on it with both sovereign nations and maybe the U.S. Space Force to help them, and criminal cartels. Okay. They're vulnerable. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to hire mercenaries. Think of Blackwell in space, or companies like Blackwell that will protect these lumbering corporations. They'll have their own security systems. They'll have their own security on Earth and in space when they're mining on asteroids, on the moon or Mars or wherever, okay? These three will have interactions with each other. The Space Force is not tasked to protect these companies. It's tasked to protect the assets of the United States. So if you're a company, you could be on your own. So you have to hire these mercenaries, like companies hire their own security guards. Well, we speculate that if they do that, then these mercenaries could become their own, let's say, take over these corporations as cartels were formed. Case in point it was a cartel group called Las Zetas. Now, Las Zetas were formerly the most elite soldiers in the Mexican military, and they decided they wanted a little more money, so they hired themselves out as enforcers of the cartels. And then when they saw, despite making much more money, they decided we can do this better. So they did, and they became Las Zetas, and they became the most ruthless cartels of all the cartels in Mexico. We see, not necessarily going to happen, that people in the Space Force can see opportunities instead of working on a general's or a colonel's salary, link up with basically the cartels, or link up with, let's say, Lockheed or the prime manufacturers in space, the SpaceX, take some of those employees out and create a paramilitary group to protect corporations in space. Because if they had that, then instead of calling on the United States Space Force, that company that was running a space station would have a phone number to call, and they would have the technology themselves, having the Corsairs that would have a rapid response to a type of activity that would be in space, on a space station, or something analogous. It could be plundering, disrupting BARDA space manufacturing and space satellite servicing. All sorts of things will be disrupted. Because as they consolidate the technologies used for these things on a rational basis, you don't have bespoke technologies, so it's easier for somebody to identify the weak points and take advantage of them with hacking and hardware disruptions on Earth and in space. I
have another email question for you. I'll go ahead and do it now. George is in Denver, and by the way, listeners, you can call 866-687-7223. We would like to hear from you. George is in Denver, and he says, well, you talk about laundering money. So, first of all, there are no real financial operations taking place in space. There's no banks. There's no entity that I can even conceive of where you could launder money. So money has to be laundered here on Earth. Furthermore, there's only a few companies that can get to space with hardware, such as SpaceX and a handful of others and some governments. So don't they vet their customers and would not allow a bad actor to use their services?
Yes.
And wouldn't they detect them?
Yes. In other words, it should be like AML, like anti-money laundering people in banks. They need to do what they call KYC, know your customers, but they don't do that as effectively. there's enormous criminal activity in the banking industry internationally. For instance, like there was something not that long ago. We did a seminar. We did a webinar. You and I. That's my partner to you listeners who couldn't make the show. On money laundering in space, and one of the interesting things that we discovered in the research is that the UK sanctioned a law firm that was supposed to be the top anti-money laundering firm for helping criminals launder money. So yes, in space right now, there aren't any banks. But it would be on Earth, and it doesn't have to be the companies that have the ability to go because they wouldn't know they're criminals in the first place, because money launderers are going to be concealing themselves in a host of concealment, of limited partnerships, of private corporations, investment banks that they could set up that you would never know. It could be offshore because the United States has good money laundering laws, but if you're not in the United States, the touch point to the United States is not very, very, very effective at all. So there's many nodes in companies. Communication companies could be involved. It's not just the launch companies. It could be satellite companies. It could be the companies that provide very bespoke services to satellite companies. Is a way of entree points. There's many multiple entree points in the space industry, not just the big boy points.
So SpaceX or ULA might not know they have a bad actor customer?
Right. Banks don't know they have a bad actor customer either, or other organizations.
Alice in Salt Lake City says, I'm curious as to when you think space will be developed enough to become this corrupt.
As soon as it becomes profitable, and that's 3 to 5 years depending on who you talk to, but they're working very aggressively on this. Where there's money and crime, will go with it. As a matter of fact, one of our advisors, a gentleman by the name of George Sowers, who teaches...
he's a guest on the show frequently. We know how
George works with us in terms of an advisory. And George, when we approached George, because I know him from the Colorado School of Mines and what he does and his work, he testified before Congress that there would be piracy. And when we were talking to him, he said, yeah, I think it's a good thing because if there's pirates up in space, that means there's a space economy. That's an actual quote.
Will they be pushing fentanyl in space? Do you see drugs in space?
You know, I got to tell you, that is a very interesting question. Probably not, but there probably will be other things that cartels would be interested in, like oxygen, water, propulsion. That's plunder. That's the plunder that the Spanish took from mines in Mexico and Latin America. Silver, it was used mostly silver, but not limited to it, if you remember. And that's what got them essentially. These lumbering Spanish galleons were laden with all this plunder that they took themselves, so they were basically easily attacked by more nimble and aggressive and ruthless pirates. Now, there's always a connection, by the way. I just want to point out that pirates also become governors. Like, if you look at the history of Harry Morgan, he was the greatest buccaneer who ever lived, at least from the British point of view. And he actually plundered Panama. And then he was basically made Jamaica a pirate's colony.
Right.
Okay, so what made him so interesting is one of the Spanish galleons that he conquered. He found documents that listed every single secret Spanish base in the world. So he hightails it to London, and he basically presents this to the Crown, and the Crown says, "You got to get anything you need. We got your back." Well, he goes back to Jamaica, and the governor of Jamaica didn't care for the piracy in Jamaica, and he put him in jail, and he sent him in chains back to London. Well, he took his get-out-of-jail-free card with the Crown. The Crown said, okay, go back and we'll make you vice governor, and we'll take him back to London, and he did. So you had a pirate become basically a respectable vice governor of Jamaica. That could happen, too. In other words, these histories can happen, but it's not going to be, it's not identical, it rhymes. But with space, because it's so fluid and the laws are so inexact and not enforced, it's going to be a much different environment. People will make a marine analogy, and that's a really good one. But there are laws, but even with the history of 500, 600 years of marine law, that's pretty robust. You can launder money, and it's been done forever with the complexities of ship financing. That's how the pirates will do that. They will take an analogy of how you strip off various layers of flag, cargo, ownership levels. You will never find the owners of these things. Ever.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's what makes admiralty lawyers and insurance brokers extraordinarily rich in London.
Listeners, we'd love to hear from you by phone, 866-687-7223. What is the accurate, not optimistic, not pessimistic, view of our cybersecurity and its capability to evolve in such a way as to mitigate these threats?
Well, that's a regrettable Yu's not on it because he's more the cyber expert with us. So I'm little ginger. I'm going to deal with that on a gingerly basis. Some are good and some are very, very bad. And the vulnerabilities of the cyber is because of the unification and the standardization of the software that's being used. You have to go real bespoke like the military would do. But if you're on a commercial and you got budgets, then it's a different story and it's hackable.
So the fact that you've got universal standards for something allows for pathways.
Oh, it's easier. Absolutely, and it's the same in the manufacturing and the logistic chain process as well, yes.
But how can you do it without standardization?
Well, again, it either goes on security or it's a cost. The standardization is your cost. And that's why they do it. You need an interoperability type of thing. Because, take for instance, a little off topic here, but, there's a great deal of work going into in-space satellite servicing.
Right.
Well, there's still some issues, a lot of issues here, because you're going to, if the in-space satellite servicing companies, they can't service all these other satellites there because they're not configured the right way.
Right.
In other words, when you go to a gas station and you fill her up, the gas tanks, no matter where the car is made, are standard. That's not happening now, so you're going to have a whole new generation. It's good for the satellite manufacturers and the launch people to get that together, but then it makes it easier with all the components in the satellites as well. You have specialized things in there, like you have optics that are extraordinarily classified and other abilities to listen in on things. But on the normal, non-military utilization of space things, well, they have budgets and they have to make a profit. And they will go for not perfection, they'll go for the good. Have
you ever had visits with SpaceX or ULA or Lockheed?
Me personally, no.
Has anyone on these subjects talked to these people? What do they do? No,
we haven't. We haven't had conversations with them. We've had conversations with the Space Force. We've had conversations. I've had conversations personally with people at the House. Brian Barrett, he's head of the House Science and Technology Committee, which covers space, and it's NASA's budgets over there with him. I've spoken to some of his people, and I sent them the book, but I've never heard back from them. There are people in the intelligence community, but there's no role for them because by law the only entity in space is the Space Force. I see. Ideally, the Navy should have a big role in this because the origins of the Navy are privateering. John Paul Jones was a privateer.
Right.
So baked in the DNA of the Navy, you have that. They deal with space in terms of vast distances. They see beyond the horizon. They sort of get it. And of all the military service branches, the Navy understands crime. The Air Force doesn't understand crime. The Army doesn't understand crime.
The Coast Guard does, but that's...
But that's, again, like the seas.
Uh-huh.
The intelligence community as a whole does not. Some do, some don't. But that's not their... I can tell you a point. I've spoken to people directly from the CIA, and they're just totally uninterested in it. It's not their bailiwick. They don't want to do it.
Well, of course, this plays to the strength of the bad actors.
Well, that's another conversation, but, they are who they are, okay. But the Space Force has technological blinders on it. This is something that you and I have talked about, and when we speak to people in Washington, what the Space Force is not it's a wonderful organization, and they're really on top of a lot of things. But they're constrained by the technological ability of what they would call their situation awareness. It's all tech. Well, go back. I'm from a fighter pilot family on both sides, with my wife in particular. When you had more avionics were introduced into fighter planes and jets, even before jets, you couldn't rely on the sensors, so they had to look out the window. Because the sensors always were not necessarily 100%. So the smart pilots looked out the window to see what was coming at them. The same thing. The Space Force needs to look out the window. They have to recognize that there's non-state actors out there, like irregular warfare. And that's another subcategory of what's going to happen. Because when you have criminals up there, criminals are going to join in with basically as plausible deniability as privateers of state actors. So you can have satellites taken out by non-state actors under the guise of we're pirates. And think of, again, Harry Morgan or Francis Drake. But nobody would know who their handlers are.
So,
and we see that happening, too.
You could have an ASAT attack on satellites, and it might not originate from one of our typical adversaries. It's
Correct.
Originated from a criminal organization that we are clueless about because we have blinders on.
Right, and we would not know who that criminal organization would.
That's what I was going to say, yeah. And then we wouldn't know what to do about it, or... Well, we know how to start it up again, but... Well,
you can go even farther, is that this criminal organization could be actually a creature of an intelligence agency or another entity that would provide that service.
So Russia doesn't want us to know it was them, so they have a cartel agency.
We know that the Russians have had, for many decades, a relationship with Sinaloa. The SVR has had that since the 90s. That's been documented. So criminal cartels do have relationships with state clandestine divisions of intelligence agencies. And that's the same in Asia, too. I can go into, for instance, China, which is... PLA is going through some very, very interesting troubles right now. And their relationship with criminal organizations is just insane. Because the PLA itself is a criminal organization and has been because they've been more interested in their business opportunities than in their military responsibilities.
you've got Becky, who says she's in the D.C. area, whatever that means, and she says, what are the solutions to this potential problem and era starting today?
Those responsible for the security of our space assets, and that includes military and commercial, need to recognize that non-state actors are a threat and will be, because it's inevitable with the closer these entities get, commercial ones get to profitability, the more it will be attractive to those. Now, going back, you need to find out of who your customers are or who your investors are, because not all of them are going to be legitimate. They will be there for profit, and they will be there for observational and instruction purposes. If people don't understand how powerful these cartels are.
Well, we see it with the drug laws and stuff like that. They're powerful in that sense.
But they're powerful in the United States as well. They have their own intelligence organizations. They have their own R&D. They have their own data processing and marketing organizations. They are really savvy in the United States.
Why can't they be shut down by the U.S. government? They have to know where these people are and what they're doing.
Yeah, but the cartels know where their adversaries are as well. It's not that they don't stand still. I mean, there are people that I'm of the side that it would be a critical disaster for us to go in there and see if we can basically wipe out the cartels, because it just will not happen. You know, they're expecting it. They've laundered the money. They've got assets all over. They've got politicians that they have basically in their pockets. They know military organizations. They know the structure, just like any other adversary of the United States. They've studied it.
So Trump says he wants to declare war on the cartels and get them out of America. So you're saying that's not feasible?
He has to find them.
Well, don't they know where they?
They don't have I believe if they had a handle on this, a real handle on what the penetration of the cartels in the United States, and it's not just happened because of the of the lax under the Biden administration of letting everybody come in. We've been here a long time. But the first thing is to answer that question from your caller, your listener, is to understand that there are threats to space that are non-state actors. And number two, that it's not just in space, but it's also going to be on the Earth. So you have to look at that. And three, you have the intelligence community develop the ability and understanding of that, basically, of dealing with this. Like if you have the technologies that could be bespoke and that would be advanced beyond our capabilities, see what is happening. It just has to start with there are threats like this.
Let's see who your phone call is from. Good afternoon, caller. Welcome to the show. Who are you? Where are you, please?
This is John in Fort Worth.
Hi, John. Welcome to the program again.
Yeah, I don't see the cartel. The real problem is locating them. I don't think that's the exact problem. I think the problem is more the legalities involved. I mean, essentially, first of all, these guys are operating largely in Mexico or else in the United States, in which case they have the protection of our legal system. They have lawyers and stuff. So, I mean, you know, it's like the criminals in general. Police know who most of the criminals are. And if you could just, do it police state style and go get them all, you could do it. But the problem is, if they could do that to them, they could do it to us too. And to protect ourselves, we have these rights. And the rights, therefore, are also by all these mafia-type organizations and cartels as well. They have good lawyers. And so the result is you got to make a case. And that's where maybe finding them is a problem, because by that time they've moved or something.
Well, they also have the firepower, too, in case things get a little kinetic there. I mean, these cartels have javelins and Hellfire missiles. They scour with international arms dealers. They're extraordinarily well armed. They have more sophisticated arms than the Mexican military.
That may well be true for the Mexicans, but I think, okay, we take some casualties, but we could still beat them. But the problem is that again, I think the biggest problem is are we really going to go into Mexico and start targeting things in Mexico? That's an international offense. I mean,
no, that would be I agree with you. That would be a disaster. I mean, listen, the Mexican when Polk edged us into that war by deception to Congress. It goes back a long time. It was a disaster, actually. We got a lot of land for it, but it basically tore the country apart, actually, ours and theirs. It was a horrible, horrible thing.
You know, but, Mark, we can't even deport a criminal, illegal alien who has committed rape and murder and really crimes. We can't even get them out of the country without due process and what John is talking about, and lawyers and you're violating rights and demonstrations, and I mean, it's an impossible task.
I concur 100% on that, and the way the legal system is structured, it would make it difficult. If we go kinetic with them, it's going to be extraordinarily horrific because they will protect themselves, and they got backers too. You'd be astonished of who works with the cartels down there, not just in Mexico, but in all of Latin America. It is breathtakingly intertwined with some of the most powerful individuals on that continent and even beyond that when it goes to space in Europe, and their international connections with the triads in Asia and Albanians and all sorts of things. These people are international. As I said in the beginning, I use the cartels in Mexico as notational. You have other international criminal groups that are as ruthless and as smart and as effective in what they control with their criminal activities and the money laundering. I've always had, a little off topic, but it's always been my intuition that for the past, let's say, 30 years, many of the dysfunctions in the equity and the capital markets as a whole is because of money laundering, because of the money trying to find a home, and it causes enormous amount of disruptions in capital flows, equity bond markets, private equity, and real estate, and so on. That's just an intuition of mine. I mean, but look at you've got banks, we don't have to go back that far, that have been structured as criminal organizations like BCCI. If anybody remembers, that dates me, but if anybody remembers that bank and what happened and who was involved in that bank to covering it up, Clark Clifford, who created the CIA and the national security state. People don't see the connection there. Do you think these guys went away?
No, they get passed on.
So if these guys had the brains, there's that gentleman was talking about smart lawyers. Well, there's one of the. I'm sorry, excuse me. That's one of the smartest lawyers this country has ever seen in writing that act.
John, you're still on the line. Do you see the piracy as being defined by our guest today as being plausible in space down the road?
I guess at some point, I guess it could be if you really do have an extensive commercial space enterprise up there with large amount of activity.
Make it worthwhile.
Yeah, at some point, but I don't think it's too near term unless you say it'd be more like down the road if we really had this extensive space presence, space industry, space tourism, everything. Then, bad things go along with the rest of civilization usually, right?
Well, concurrently, yes. And but they would get in there sooner rather than later, is what we're speculating here. Because they need some the amounts of money these international criminal syndicates are generating, it's unfathomable. I mean, every number I see, I just don't believe, because I always think it's greater. And I always think that the corruption is so vast in what we would think are people that are supposed to be defending us and protecting us, and you bake that in, then I think you have a situation that is ripe for criminals and other backers to participate in space. Now, I haven't even gotten to the governance aspect of this, but that's another story. But there'll be some governance issues once we get on asteroids and the moon. And again, I keep an eye on large corporations analogous to the British East India Company. There will be a massive amount, and then the mercenaries that are going to go with it.
Yeah, that could. Yeah, we're talking about something. But I know a while back, it's a little different, but I thought the criminal organizations were putting money into movie industry and stuff like that, right? I mean,
yeah, but the movie industry doesn't generate that much money. I mean, I'm sitting here in Los Angeles, and I can tell you right now, the only thing that's happening in Los Angeles in movie production is let's say Netflix. But if you want to expand it into entertainment, then you have a conversation, because then you have the opportunities in the music business and live events and all the various graft that goes into that, and the takes and the management and that. The movie business, or the entertainment business, has been penetrated by organized crime since Edison basically came out to Edison developed the motion picture camera.
Yeah. So I guess, you think there will actually be also investing in actual new space companies?
Yes, I do. We do. That gets them to we see it as the entree point is money laundering. What do we do with this money? And then once that money is laundered, then they take a look and see how these things work. And then they begin to develop on their own. And they can easily become limited partners in a venture capital firm to see how this thing is done. And then they can start their own, and nobody would ever know it.
Well, that could well be. I mean, like I said, it still gets back to my opinion is that the very rules we have to protect our own rights end up effectively protecting criminal rights has been the nature of almost all of mafias and that sort of thing. And on the other hand, it's like if the government was free to do that, then they do it. They wouldn't necessarily be on our side at all. Now that they have the power, they just wield it. So that's why we want.
Well, they don't. But you're correct. I mean, they don't. It goes back to everything is enforcement. So let me give you a true analogy here. It's all a matter of enforcement. Right after the World War II in the early 50s, when the Soviet Union was consolidating its hold on Eastern Europe, Poland was really kicked down just because Stalin wanted to do that, and his relationship with Poland, he just grabbed it all. So the Pope called in the foreign minister, Molotov, and was basically stripped him down and just say, what you're doing is absolutely horrendous and just stop it. That was Pius XII, I believe. And so Molotov, as foreign minister, said, okay, fine. And then he said, you tell Stalin that basically he's got to stop what he's doing in Poland. So he goes back, Molotov, to Stalin, and needs to report that's his job. And he goes into Stalin's office, and he says, well, the Pope is very upset with us, yak. And Stalin looks at him and he says, remind me again, how many divisions does the Pope have? Well, that's a true statement. It's sort of like, if you're going to do it, you have to do it, but they're not doing it. And you have to be aware that there is a problem or a potential problem. In other words, 40 years ago, when computers became out, if people would look at cyber as a problem, then maybe we're not going to have these issues today with ransomware and all these other things, that could have been looked at. Now, I don't know. That's something my partner is actually quite savvy about, and he talks about that a lot. The book is sort of like, hey, we do have a couple of sort of solutions, but the first one starts, there is going to be a problem. This will happen. We can't handicap the timeline on this, but we think it's going to be sooner rather than later. Okay, maybe 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7, but it's not going to be 40 or 50 because if you look at the development of the commercial aspects of space, it's happening pretty quickly. I mean, Axiom wants to put its space station on, by 29. Musk is serious about going to Mars. He wants Isaacman to stop the moon program and go directly to Mars. And Trump seems to be behind that, from what I've been reading. But I just don't know what the thought is there.
So, John, do you have anything more? Maybe I'll clear the line and see if someone else wants to call in.
Well, the other issue you always have also is the enforcers are generally fairly lowly paid civil servants compared to the criminals of these high-level criminal organizations. Not the street crime, but the cartel, mafia-level people. That's always another problem you're going to have, right? They'll be susceptible to corruption because they want some of that money too.
Yeah. Well, that's what we think is going to happen. That's going to be when we talk about the talent.
Yeah.
If they want to build their own space infrastructure, well, how will they get the talent? Well, they can certainly hire it from the former head of a Lockheed Space Group or something like that, or a 2-star general from the Space Force and put it together and say, okay, you're retired now, why don't you go work for us? Not everybody will take that. But a lot of ex-fighter pilots or bombers or Air Force guys took that opportunity to make a tremendous amount of money by ferrying drugs from point A to point B for them.
Yeah. But as far as space, where are they going to launch from?
That is, first of all, we think it would start basically with payload. They would develop satellites. Again, we feel that they will have the ability to develop technological, sophisticated satellites beyond what the other ones are working on. They can keep secrets too. And those satellites would be beyond the imagination of the conventional satellite industry, and they can grab not just on a ransomware, but actually capture satellites. They would launch, we think, from friendly companies. I say Mexico because it's a narco state. It's a criminal state, and they can do a lot down there that nobody would be very attentive to until it's...
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Well, I'll clear the line here for somebody else to get a chance to talk to you then.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the call. Listeners, John cleared the line. You're welcome to give us a call. We'd like to hear from you. 866-687-7223. Is there a window for stock fraud in the securities market with what you've been talking about, and what is the path for that?
Well, there's always stock fraud. I think that a lot of it's going to start off as private ventures, so that wouldn't have an impact immediately. Smaller ones just to get your feet wet. And it could be actually a lot of these ventures could be outside the United States. They could look at companies in Europe, and they could look at companies in Asia. Depending on what their desirability is and convenience level is, but I think that they, to get around some of the more sophisticated anti-crime measures, they would go outside the United States where we don't have touch points there. Okay. Now, when you get involved in, if these companies get in the penny stock or stuff like that, then you may have some issues there. But in terms of the, NASDAQ and the larger ones, I don't see that happening for some time. I just think it's private. Grab the technology and get the people to work on it and be quiet about it. Once you're public, then all of a sudden people are looking at your shoulder. Even the criminal ones, people have these laws and you have to reporting things and so on. I don't think they would want that. I think that they would just be quiet, do it, learn, and then basically do what they need to do to watch. In the beginning, it's going to be launder the money and then basically watch what's going on and see how they can participate.
Alan is in Los Angeles with an email for you. Once again, your line is available if you want to call, 866-687-7223. Alan says which do you think is harder? Stop it from ever happening, get rid of it once you realize it's happened, or 3, learning to live with it and mitigate it as best as you can?
Once it's there, it's there. And then if living with it would be very, very problematic, because in addition to the plunder and the piracy, you have governance issues. And once you allow these guys into the fabric of space economy, and then you are dealing with, let's say, domiciling on or having, outposts on Mars or whatever the planetary platform is, and if they're there too, they can wind up becoming the criminals that take over the town. And that would be very, very bad, because then you don't have the freedom. You're in a structured environment, and they can take over, let's say, the life support systems, and then you're going to have problems. So it would be better to sort of stop it prior to.
If you can.
If you can, but then that's why the book was written, to see, because we don't have any of all the answers. We just think that it's going to be a pretty big problem. And, people that have read the book don't, when you talk about it first, piracy in space, you sort of like, smiles, which is okay. But once they got into it, they go, oh, wow, this, we see this. And so it's just, we're just trying to, bring this to the attention of people, that a lot of people who are involved in space and will be involved in space need to deal with this. One thing we did have an effect on is insurance. An insurance company in London that's connected to Lloyd's. When we spoke to them about this, and this was sort of like in the beginning of the book process about a year and a half ago, and we got to know the executive. He's responsible for all space underwriting for this particular company. Is now going to make it. Is now looking at how to make space and piracy and crime in space basically baked into the policies that he underwrites in the space business.
Interesting.
The insurance companies probably would be taking a lead in this.
Well, because they don't want a loss coming from this.
That's correct. And people don't realize, actually, that, space insurance, because right now it's confined to launch and, satellites and so on, is pretty pedestrian, actually. The risk of a launch going bad, well, we're talking about SpaceX, essentially, is pretty low. But when you have piracy and criminal issues coming down the world, you want to bake that in. It's like, having a war type of thing. I mean, if Musk's satellites, right, were shot down, who pays for that? How are they insured? If Russia took them out.
Well,
those are not U.S. satellites.
Do you think they are?
Maybe
do you think they are
now
insured?
I don't know how those insurance policies work.
So usually, if I have a policy, if there's an official act of war, then they don't cover anything.
That's right, but you can get war insurance.
You can buy an addendum for it.
That's right.
But if it's on the cusp and no war has been declared, yet the bastard blew up my car in my house with a pipe bomb or something, and he was a known terrorist or something, then they probably do their best to say it was an act of war. Screw you, we're not going to pay you.
That's if you didn't have it, but if you had, exactly, but if you had war insurance.
If I had the addendum, then,
that's right.
Then they would do that, but maybe I was just going on the
basic policy. If you don't have the addendum, then you have issues. Yeah, that's correct. That is correct.
What do you?
My understanding.
What do you? Does your book outline official steps to take and solutions based on today?
At the end, we do have sort of like one. Again, I keep going back to it because you got to start with hey, it's a problem, and then get people who are definitely involved, the Space Force, relevant intelligence agencies, and other policymakers. But you don't want it as a talk shop. Commercial people like financiers, investors, particularly insurance, talk about how this can be mitigated. or looked at and dealt with, just analogously how you would deal with piracy on the open seas.
So I go to a lot of space conferences, and sometimes big industry ones like AIAA, and I've seen space rescue as a topic, a growing topic, and I've seen ASAT problems, but directed at state actors, no interference with our satellites and stuff like that. But I have not yet seen or heard ever a space piracy topic at a conference so far.
I did. It's funny you mentioned that because I spoke about a month ago at a conference in Long Beach at the Queen Mary, the Space Law Conference. It was the first one of its kind. And I spoke to 200 lawyers. But then these were all space lawyers, and it was an extraordinarily diverse group. These are people that deal with ITAR issues for their clients. Many of them are prime contractors. Many of them are startups. So they're looking on corporate financing levels and so on, all interconnected with space. So it was reasonably well received. People took it seriously when I had my presentation. It was more of I was on a panel, not a formal presentation. And my book was available, and the book was sold out, actually, which was nice. And then, other than that, that was it. That was the first one. I was approached by the conference organizers.
Bill is in Tucson, and once again, 866-687-7223. There's still time. Bill is in Tucson, and Bill says many believe that China is more than just an adversary and is not only a bad actor but a criminal state. But over the years, China has no doubt hijacked our intellectual property for a variety of reasons and has benefited from our intellectual property. It seems like the president is struggling to try to get a control on that, and the outcome of his efforts to stop China from doing that are unknown. But if we are unable to stop a country here on Earth from grabbing intellectual property and doing what they want with it, why do we think we can control any of this in space from the same types of players?
I have a little counter on China's abilities on things. They steal like crazy. And they've been doing it. And not only did they steal, I mean, many U.S. officials have just given them stuff to take.
Right.
But here's my take on China. I used to be responsible for China when I was in Interpublic Group on a corporate level, in terms of being responsible for developing. This was in the late 90s. And it really hasn't changed, except that China's gotten bigger and more sophisticated, so on and so forth. Look at China. Here's the analogy that I use about China. You're in a town, and there's a French bakery, and the French bakery is the best French bakery around. There's nothing even comes close, because the gentleman and the family that runs this bakery have been doing it for 60 years, and there is nothing that even comes close to the quality of what is baked and what is sold. But the family needs to sell, and sells the bakery to another group of people. And part of that sale will include, of course, the recipes, and not only the recipes, but, here's where we supply, here supplies our flour, here's where you get the sugar, here's where you get all the things that you're going to need to make everything on the recipes that we're going to give you, and we're either going to spend some time in showing you how to do this. So the deal is done, everything is fine, and the new owners come in, and at first everybody comes to the bakery, but after a couple of months it fizzles off. Quality is not as good. Well, why? Well, they're going exactly by the book. But they don't have the intuitive capabilities of, like, putting a finger on the batch and going, we need a little more butter here, or there's too much sugar here and we need salt. That only comes from experience and creativity and imagination and talent. The Chinese don't have that.
Well, but they still end up with an aircraft carrier and a fighter jet that looks like an aircraft.
But we don't know how good we don't know how good they are.
So far,
we don't. They've never been in the kinetic war. And the other thing is that I think I mentioned earlier that within the past, I would say 6 months, 30 generals have been dismissed. And last 2 weeks ago, now it's 3 weeks ago, the number 2 in the entire Chinese military and the Chinese Military Commission was dismissed. There's weird things going on. This has been going on and on because the PLA is involved in businesses. They're not supposed to be, but they are. They're one of the most corrupt entities within the Chinese communist establishment. Not only were the generals dismissed, but the political officers that were responsible for making sure there's ideological purity within the military, they were dismissed as well. That means speculating that the upper echelons, like you want to, may not trust them. Those guns can be turned against the party, and the party may not trust the military. That's a speculation on my end, and that's all it is. But just looking at factual reportage of the dismissals, and what caught my attention was the political officers being dismissed was very interesting to me.
What should SpaceX be doing now about this issue?
Oh, absolutely, seeing how they can counter it, because I look at SpaceX. If I read SpaceX correctly, they want to be the Spanish galleons of taking back and forth interplanetary travel, okay?
Uh-huh.
They're the bus. They're the UPS, the cargo. That's what they want to do. They're vulnerable to corsairs. So they should be sitting down and thinking, how can they develop a counter to corsairs? Who would be the most likely threats to our long-term and short-term business plans? That's what they should be looking at.
Are they doing that, to your knowledge?
I have no idea. I don't know. But if I had the opportunity of speaking to, it would be Musk or Shotwell or the others, I would have that conversation with them.
Why don't you send them your book?
Down the road, we will. We've sent around, the review. We've gotten over like 30 reviews. Nobody's contact. We'll get there. We'll get to him down the road.
I think you ought to put 2 books in the mail to FedEx, to Shotwell, and to Musk. And I don't know, maybe Musk will read it if he has a spare time anytime. Who the hell knows? But you have another caller. A good afternoon, caller. Who are you and where are you, please?
This is Tim from Huntsville.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, well, what I want to see, if I think anything is going to be a threat to SpaceX, at least in a near term, I think it would be most likely a terrorist attack. Maybe a smuggled surface-to-air missile hitting a Starship just after takeoff.
I think he's actually right, and I think that with the cartels having the capabilities and the missiles, they could basically threaten them. Or they did something else. They put a satellite on his as a customer, and they basically said, if you don't give us $50 billion or however much they want, we can blow it up because there's nothing you can do about it, and we can do it. So, yeah, I concur with that. The vulnerabilities are there, or their entire spaceport could get taken out, too, if you got the Javelin missiles and so on and so forth.
So you're saying he has lots of threats today?
I think that fellow is absolutely correct, actually, yeah.
Well, I was thinking less the cartels and more like a political terrorist group or a religious one like the Al-Qaeda.
possible. They have a lot of our assets now, don't they?
Including uniforms. Yes, yes,
yeah.
they do.
You see, the difference is the terrorists want a political. They would do that for political purposes, and they would want a high-profile thing.
Right.
And that's what we give them high profile. The cartels are more mercenary. We want the money. And that would be something that they would have to figure out, well, how would we do that? It would be threat quietly. And then if you don't do it, the cartels would carry. I believe the cartels would pull the trigger. They if they say they're going to do something, they would do that because they're so ruthless and they're so deprived. The depravity there is insane. So God help us if they work together. But you've got Hezbollah and the cartels working together down in Paraguay and all sorts of places. So I don't know.
I think if they got hit by a cartel attack, they probably would notify the FBI, but it probably wouldn't make the news pages for quite a while. A terror attack, the terrorists would make it public and try to get as much.
That's how they live for the publicity on it. Yeah, most terrorist attacks are basically for the publicity value and so on. That gentleman is actually quite correct. I think that actually is a very efficacious thing that could happen.
Yeah, I met Tim in person when I was in Huntsville, so he's been calling for 25 years, and now I know him in person. Tim, don't give him any ideas, Tim.
All right, I won't. I'm pretty sure they would have thought of it already.
Well, Huntsville is where there's so much space activity down there.
Absolutely. Anything else, Tim, or is that it?
That's it.
Thank you very much. Listeners, there still is time if you hurry, and you would like to call 866-687-7233. And, I haven't talked to people on SpaceX for a couple of years, but I do talk to Tori Bruno and a couple of other people with ULA and some others. And
they would benefit.
They tell me what they go through constantly to defend against cyber attacks today that are ongoing, and how they're connected to the FBI and others to try to thwart it. And they get thousands of attacks a day just on cyber with today's technology. So if that expanded into their payloads and their missions or their security missions with the United States and the threat were credible, man, that would be one hell of a monkey wrench thrown into national security.
Of course, and we definitely think that that's the vulnerability of it. I mean, we've always thought that you throw a satellite on their normal commercial payloads, and then basically that satellite is basically just explosives.
Do you go around the country? Do you make presentations on this, or are you going to have a sequel to the book?
No, the book just came out about, let me see, what is this, May? This came out the end of April. It's only been out 2.5 months, barely. So, no, we haven't got any speaking engagement. We have a speakers bureau and so on, but nobody's contacted us yet. Hopefully they will. We can be a little more robust on there. But the book is getting around. It's selling more than we thought it would be, frankly. And we're pleased with that. And, people like you that have reached out to us, help and so on.
Let's see who wants to call, and I've got an email for you. Good afternoon, caller. Who are you? Where are you, please?
This is Marshall in Yukon.
Okay,
and home of the Yukon Gold Potato, right?
We already covered that last time. Anyway, my question is, we have these constellations of satellites for communication, i.e. Starlink, and Bezos is putting up his. I understand the Chinese and Europeans want to put up theirs. Isn't that going to be the first weak link in working comm jobs and so on like that around the world?
It's low-hanging fruit, yeah. And it would be demonstratable, too. You know, it would depend on, you know, they did that test, the ASAT test and so on, you know, but what's one satellite? If you're going to have a robust, real damaging thing, you would have to take out multiple satellites. But one would be demonstrated. But, you know, in other words, criminal organizations could say, you know, if you don't pay us X amount of dollars now, we're going to take out 5 satellites. And we can do that. And if the money doesn't come, they take them out. Then they do it again and again and again.
Well, my thought was
the difference between a political take or a military take. They're all talking about China, and let's say criminals want plunder. They want money. That's what is motivating. Terrorists and political operatives have different agendas, but the underlining connection is what they are doing is a criminal activity.
Mm. Well, I was thinking that a good software engineer might find a methodology of just temporarily taking over the whole network, the whole constellation of satellites.
Well, those constellations of satellites, that's a very interesting point, and they probably... But the problem is that right now, they're not uniformly connected with the software. As the software in these things, as we were talking a little earlier, becomes more and more, particularly on the commercial level, more and more uniform just because of budgetary reasons and it's easier to do, then you could have that thing. You can take out the whole network. But if you've got, like, you know, X amount of satellites are running on this software and X amount are running on that software, you can get a bunch, but you can't get the entire network.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point. Diversify just to make it harder.
Well, what else, Marshall? Anything else?
No, I think that'll be enough for today. Until next time.
Thank you. Listeners, I have an email from AJ. He's in Maryland. The guest said the government, i.e. the Space Force, would not protect commercial entities, only the government ones. But we have many examples of government forces fighting for commercial and citizens, even police, local government, and even Teddy Roosevelt against piracy. Comments?
I could see them doing that and protecting U.S. commercial assets, but it would not be their predominant interest. But like the Navy, for instance, the job is to keep the sea lines of communication clear for shipping. That's a commercial thing, but it's also concurrently baked into our national security strategies and policies. So yeah, you can't totally separate that, but I think I guess what I should have said a little more clearer, on the priority, it would be military assets and commercial assets.
Military and government first.
Yeah.
Over and then commercial and private.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
Yes, but the thing is, it's interesting that becomes a little more interesting because the relationship between the Pentagon and Musk's Starlink is now much more integrated. So where Musk's commercial interests and the Pentagon's interests are, they're becoming more and more in sync. And the Pentagon does have a lot of influence of how those Musk's Starlink are.
So protecting SpaceX assets might be the same as national security assets.
Well, yes, the Pentagon is so involved with that now, yes. They're developing other things together on this, so yes, it would be very, very, very tied in together.
Here's an interesting question, and listeners, this may be the last question of the day. But this is from Peter, and Peter is in Kansas City. And he says, I'm really curious how you would see what's going on in the state of affairs in American university education. So I'm not talking about high school or lower forms, but in our universities, including graduate school. Is there anything there that is being taught about these kinds of potential global activities, either through maybe liberal arts and political science and history, or maybe through engineering, and that when you develop these systems, you need to start thinking about how to develop against bad actors that are not state actors. What's the state of getting into our universities with some
I know of no specific formal class or classes that are dealing with space piracy or crime and so on. There's a lot of aeronautical engineering courses or graduate degrees and so on, and I doubt if it's taught there, but I could be wrong on this. But the way to get a handle on this is what I would do if I was designing the curriculum was one, look for, of course, on the technical aspects, look on the developing of the military aspects, the militarization of space, but look at history of piracy, deep into the history of piracy in this country and globally. But we have a lot of experience in piracy. We were extremely ruthless in North Africa during Jefferson's time. Really ruthless. We didn't tolerate any of our ships being plundered. We were also very ruthless as privateers, so we should draw on the Navy's experience in this and have the Space Force just essentially understand the historical foundations of that and, talk to naval historians about piracy would be a start. And then link it together with their technological sophistication, their intelligence understanding, which is obviously much, up to date, 21st, 22nd century. Bake it into their weaponization of what kind of weapons they're using, but go in the fundamentals of crime and piracy. As I said, what makes the Navy attractive is they understand crime of all the national security agencies, maybe with the exception of the FBI, but the FBI would not have much to say in this conversation. But the Navy would have a lot to say.
Well, but the people running the Navy now were not the ones getting the experience with pirates and stuff.
No, but naval historians would probably have a seat at that table. Really good ones, in Annapolis or the Navy, up in Portsmouth, up around there in New England, Naval War Academy.
I have been asked to teach a college-level commercial space class to a smaller state school in Texas, starting toward the end of the summer, which I've agreed to do. I don't know how much control I have over the agenda. That I guess is yet to be determined. But I'm thinking of adding this topic later in the semester because I do see it as a fit to commercial space, and it would at least get the graduates of that program some cutting-edge things to think about. Would you guys be interested in a guest?
Oh, I would definitely, yeah. As you get ready to do that, we should have another conversation on that, absolutely.
Yeah, it'd probably be by Zoom or something like that. It's an online course, so I don't know yet how it would work.
No. We can definitely have that conversation, and we should all, the three of us, should basically see how we can help you, or you and I can see how we can help you. I'd love to do that.
Is there anything we have left out that we should have talked about today?
I think we covered the I was going to say the waterfront, but the atmosphere. We did. I think we had plenty of time, and it was relaxed, and we had good guests and speakers and so on, and call-ins. I really appreciated the opportunity to really sort of, instead of a 15, 20-minute interview, you gave a lot of time, and you were a wonderful host, and got a wonderful show.
Here's an 11th hour question. I don't know if it's a joke or not, but what the hell, I'll do it. This is Sandy in San Francisco, and Sandy said, David, I know you used to live in the Bay Area and spend a lot of time in San Francisco before you hightailed it out to Nevada. He says, I'm wondering why you haven't asked if this piracy that might happen in space might include shanghaiing some people, such as what they used to do for the pirate ships and the ships, to work the problems that the cartels and the criminals want to affect. Might we see some sort of space Shanghaiing going on?
That was physical kidnapping.
Right.
The way I see that happening would be extortion. So let's say the cartels would want a particular individual to work with them. And if they refuse the money, they could say, if you don't work with us, we liquidate your family, and we'll do it tomorrow.
And they're credible with that threat.
Very credible with that threat.
So that's a kind of Shanghai.
It's extortion. It does have a place in their understanding. Many times, though, it's the money, it's the bribery. It works. I mean, they recruit grad students to help work with them on fentanyl precursors, and because they buy their parents, homes, and they buy them homes, and they pay off their college debt, and they give them enormous salaries, and they go to work, and they give them a lab, and they go to work.
So if they pay them and give them the bribe money, and they take it, and they get an account in a Swiss bank, can that be traced, or how secure for the criminals is using things like Swiss banks or the Caribbean or something like that?
Swiss banks can be penetrated because we opened them up. It just really depends. You can go to Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. There's all sorts of places you can do that.
So can they get paid in a way where the money can't be traced?
They can be paid. Yeah, they can figure out ways of providing them the capital. It doesn't have to be cash, by the way.
Well, but the dumb schmuck who accepts the bribe, he can't get it into his accounts probably without getting caught because he's not sophisticated enough to get the money and use it.
Or he or she is sophisticated and say, I don't want the cash in an account, give me other assets that I can work on. So give me real estate, and then I would get disbursements from the real estate investments, and that's a legitimate investment.
Except unless they wanted to know how you got the money.
How you got that, yeah. It depends how, where it is. If that real estate, using that, for example, is not in the United States, it's a little easier to deal with that than if you're doing it in Florida or something of that sort, or Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the Shanghai, going back to your cause, it's a very interesting question, by the way, can be done in several ways. It's take the gold, or watch out for the lead, as they would say.
Interesting world. That you must have fascinating dreams at night. So.
Yeah, you want to see the stuff I read, but anyway, yeah, talk to people.
Well, this has been a real pleasure talking to you. I'm sorry Hugh was not able to join us.
Yeah, I am too. He would have added a tremendous potent overlay on this conversation, and I'm sorry he couldn't make it.
Well, next time we'll make sure Hugh can join us.
Can we have a copy of this or no? Or
it'll be a recording, and I'll send you the link. And you could download it, or I could send you the MP3. Either way.
Oh, that would be great to link it to you and I. But on the curriculum, I'd love to help. And if you reach out to us at an appropriate time, we can have that conversation down the road.
We'll definitely do so. And Mark, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for the time.
Absolutely, and a lot to think about. Everybody, that's going to be it for today. Mark, are you still there, or did you get off?
Yeah, I'm here.
Listeners, that's it for today, and we'll probably resurrect this show and do another one down the road. It's an interesting topic. And
I'm happy. I'm looking forward to it.
And I'd like to do another one before it actually happens in real time.
Yeah. Well, we don't want a Pearl Harbor event. In a sense, the book is basically hoping that we don't have a Pearl Harbor event like that.
Right. Everybody have a great rest of the weekend, as we like
And
to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, and keep looking up and remember the schedule for next week. And goodbye from Mark, David, and the Space Show.